Hey, Mike here with Canadian Musician. Right now, this is the second day, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, second day of the, I'm already losing track of
it
time, at the Canadian Music Week conference here at the Sheraton Centre Hotel. Of course, probably needs no introduction, you probably recognized her already. Canadian punk icon, poet, author, activist, label head, has a wide resume and an amazing story. Bif
Nice,
Naked.
friend. Hi, hello.
Thank you for doing this. How are you doing?
It's my honor to do this. I'm doing great. Can't complain.
And I'm, well, like all your fans too, thrilled to see you have new music out. Most recent, 2 new singles out recently, Heavy and Hotbox Girls.
That's right.
First new music, I guess it's 6 years though. The last collection was an acoustic collection,
Yes.
re-recording some of your old songs. So I think it's been since, correct me if I'm wrong, 2009 since the last album of new material?
Yeah, 2009 we put out The Promise.
Yes, exactly. And so, what's that, 9 years since then, new music. Of course, a lot's been happening in your life in the intervening years.
That's
but,
right.
First of all, and we'll get into more specifics, backstory and such, but just how's it feel to be, kind of back at it on the music side of things?
Really good. I mean, music's changed so much, and it changed even from 2007, which was my Super Beautiful, to 2009. It was just like unbelievable. And now the way people get their music is different, and just everything's so different. Artists aren't putting out records anymore. Sometimes it's the singles market, sometimes it's not. It's never a market if you're an indie band.
That's true.
Radio is like very elusive, probably more than it's ever been. It's just different. It's evolving a lot, but at the same time, the internet is kind of like God.
Yeah.
You know, it can get anybody out there.
Well, in those 6 years since the acoustic collection, the industry has kind of been revolutionized by streaming. Like, those have been very impactful 6 years in terms of music distribution. Does it feel, putting new music out into the streaming, in a world controlled by the streaming paradigm, does it feel like the industry has changed radically or not too much since that last kind of album cycle?
It's hard for me to tell.
Yeah.
Being an independent artist has always been really great. I think anyone who can just do their own thing is in a fortunate position. Now the way the internet is, any kid with a computer and access to some of this amazing digital tools, like whether it's Logic, GarageBand, Pro Tools. You can look at independent artists who started out like Grimes is the best example that I know. She really was a pioneer in that field as a female, doing that and doing her own production, and then showing everyone else how it's done. And for someone like me, who works with co-writers, now it's easier than ever because we can send our files back and forth over email, which is, it's sick that you can actually do that. So in a way, it's a lot easier to make and create music. It's just a matter of getting the right people to hear it. And so that's always been the challenge for artists. So that hasn't changed.
The new songs, Heavy and Hotbox Girls, Heavy in particular, they're with a new band, Snake in the Chain. Heavy, I should say, has, especially, it sounds like a lot of new influences in it, that for folks that would have been more familiar with your older stuff. To me, it sounds like there's almost like a trancey element in there. There's some kind of industrial influences. Was this like a conscious new direction musically for you, or essentially how did this come about?
Well, the thing about it was we also wrote a record called the Jakarta Project that we never released.
Oh, really?
And that was in 2013 because it was dancey and industrial and weird and ambient and trip-hoppy, and it just wasn't really a Bif Naked fit. So we kind of sat on it and went, well, I guess it's cute and funny, but it's really just for us and our friends. And then we wanted to release Heavy for the new Bif record, which we've been working on for the last year, and it didn't seem to fit. So we formed Snake in the Chain as a kind of a one-off project. We wanted to do the tour with the Headstones. And so Snake in the Chain was lucky enough to tour with them nationally, which was amazing. And Heavy really seemed to fit that project more. But the response was so good that we thought, okay, we'll do the original thing and keep it for our Bif record that's coming out. And Hotbox Girls is definitely more fun and summery and sassy. It's kind of more traditional in a way, but experimenting with different drum beats and sounds and directions. I've always been lucky enough to do because the records have always been kind of eclectic.
Yeah.
So it's served me well.
Okay. This is the first batch of new songs. And actually, first I should ask, these 2 new singles, is this a preview of a full LP or EP to come?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
Is that completed and just awaiting release, or is it still in the works?
Well, I mean, honestly, we probably could have, anyone you probably know writes 60 songs for a record. And traditionally, a lot of the record labels that we work with, they only want 10 or 11. And so, you know, you kind of have to, and I've always been the type of artist that goes, okay, I'm going to let the grown-ups pick the songs because they know what they want. I don't actually care. If they like any of my songs, I'm happy. So now I'm sitting here with all these songs still from the last 2 years, and then the stuff that we're currently writing. I don't know. There's some artists that release a single a month and just do things that way.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's good or bad, but that's how they do things. I think it's probably still important to package it in a body of work.
Yeah.
Because it gives people kind of a frame of reference. Maybe I'm just like a different generation of music listener, but I'm hoping that we do an EP and then the record to follow that, which has the EP inside of it.
Yeah. And there's all kind of matters of thought on this, but just recently I was talking to the guys from 3 Days Grace, and in that conversation, one of them mentioned like they kind of look at an album as almost like a time capsule of, you know, a 2 or 3 year span in your life and your career and that kind of thing.
Definitely.
Whereas others, it's like more utilitarian. It's just like, this is a collection of songs I have. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Do you look at your albums as kind of touchstones?
Oh yes, most definitely, especially up until now. I mean, you know, and I laugh at them. Like I can listen to my first couple records and I mean, my voice was higher, you know, because I was a little kid, basically, is how I see it now. But also, there were different producers we worked with that had just different styles of doing that musical direction, and I can really hear the difference, especially now that I'm, you know, more experienced in recording and just being a good listener. I have such a deep appreciation for how we did our first couple records. There was no like computer stuff. We didn't have auto-tune. Believe me, you could hear that, you know? And it makes me laugh because I can really remember being in the studio doing vocals on the Bif Naked record and having to do a line 100 times. In fact, I think it was 102 times in a row. And as a vocalist, trying not to actually like, you know, hang myself with the mic cord because I couldn't hear the difference. And you get to a point where you know for sure that producer, they have dog hearing. It's not like normal people. That's why they're the producers. I don't have dog hearing, but now, of course, that probably wouldn't happen. I'll probably do it 10 or 15 and they could piece it together if I couldn't do it, but experience helps.
During this year's CMW conference, it seems like one of the, and this has, I guess, always been a theme at the conference, but it seems especially more so this year, there's 2 things I want to touch on. But first is the matter of independence, either doing it completely on your own, as you've always done, starting your own label, Her Majesty's Records, or if not your own label, signing to an indie label. I know this is a very broad question, but looking throughout the span of your career, what have been the pros and cons of doing it, going completely independent for 20 plus years?
Well, we were forced to, and that's really the truth. I, was lucky enough to have a manager. By the time I was 24, he managed the first band I was in, and that's how I wound up with a manager. But it was due to nobody in Canada would sign me, and so we were forced to strike out on our own, make our own way, form a label, and take it from there. We licensed all over the world, and that was just the only way I've ever done things. We've licensed to independent companies in different countries, and we've also worked with major labels. There's definitely a difference, but there's a difference between markets too, and that may not be the same anymore, but when I was young, it was very much the same. Markets like Germany, we're very cutting edge, and the internet wasn't what it is today. It was hard to reach that large audience. Now it's easier, to be honest with you. It's much easier for a young band to strike out on their own. is the playing field level anymore. People are buying likes, they're buying listens and tweets, and they're buying followers.
Yeah.
So now it's just like, you can't really judge anymore whether or not a young band, you've never heard of, they have 1 million followers.
Yeah.
You're like, oh man, I'm missing out. Like, I'm obviously behind and so there's an allure to that. It's very seductive, but at the end of the day, it's a personal preference. If you like the song, you're just going to listen to it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really matter if anyone else likes it or not. So in one way, I think it's a really exciting time for young bands. And for me, as as an artist, it's an exciting time, but also as a mentor and someone who looks ahead in my own life and says, what if I'm going to manage bands? What am I going to look for in a young band? I'm going to look for things that I like.
Yeah.
Work ethic first and foremost, but I'm going to look at the songs that I like.
Yeah. But career-wise, and I know you wrote a memoir a couple of years ago, so maybe you did some of this throughout that process. But when you look back at your career, is there key moments or decisions made or not made that you see have really been turning points along the way?
Oh, most definitely. I think that all of us can think that way, and we can second guess what we would have done differently.
Yeah.
They say that you go through life and you have to live your life like you have no regrets. But certainly, if I could go back and do some of these professional decisions over again, I would have done them differently.
Really?
And I think that anyone could say that just based on our experience. When I was a young performer, some of the things I did on stage, I wouldn't do today. And some of the things I was afraid to do, I would do today. So it's just life experience, and but I'm really, I really get a kick out of the last 30 years of being in show business.
Absolutely.
It's loads of fun. It's so much fun.
Yeah. And of course, in the late in the first decade of the 2000s, you had an aggressive form of breast cancer. You are now a survivor. You followed that process. Like I mentioned, you wrote a memoir a couple years ago. Those are two things that I gather can really alter a person's perspective on life and art and everything else. Either together or separately, those two experiences, the cancer diagnosis and that battle and winning it, and then the reflection that it takes to write a memoir, how have those influenced what you're now doing musically?
I think as a touring musician, it prepared me for the Kimmel Award.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and being a performer is a different thing. Like, anyone who is diagnosed with breast cancer, or any cancer, male or female, anything, when you're diagnosed with something that is potentially life-changing illness or terminal illness, or you get in an accident or anything like that, it's definitely going to make you fearful. It's terrifying. People are terrified of dying.
Yeah.
Unless you've been on tour for 25 years, and then, like me, you're going to go, oh, thank God. Oh my God, I'm good. It was the first vacation I ever had.
Yeah.
And I used to joke that it was my cancer vacation. But ultimately, and because humor is how I cope with a lot of different stressors in life, but ultimately it was absolutely stopped my career trajectory. I mean, really and truly, I went from doing a European tour and being the host of Bodog Fight, interviewing MMA fighters in helicopters, in between U.S. and European tours, to getting ball and being in the chemo ward. And that's a weird thing, because anybody who is dealing with an illness or diagnosed with cancer or anything, it leads to a kind of a self-consciousness that you didn't have before. And if you have a public persona or a public identity, even if it's not your own self-identity, that is suddenly off the table. And it's like, people call it Bif Naked, healthy, abs, half top, all this stuff, and then suddenly I was bald. I had jaundice, I was yellow, I had lymphedema. It was like, oh my God, I was 35, 36 years old. So it really did threaten everything about my job that I love and that I'm passionate about. And it took me a couple of years to kind of figure out how to basically get back to what I believe is my center. I was only comfortable doing acoustic songs for a long time because I felt so embarrassed, like just embarrassed. I was embarrassed that I got sick. I was embarrassed that I wasn't like the rocker girl that everyone knew. My hair was different. I don't know why I didn't just wear a wig, but my hair was different. It was short. Like just everything was so different. It took me a while to kind of shake it off, and I think that that's true for every patient or anyone who's coming back from any type of injury.
Yeah.
And now, I mean, I volunteer, and I like doing that. I feel like having cancer led me into my volunteering job.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy that that happened. You know, I was also a newlywed when I was diagnosed. And that is like, so that happened, which was good, because if I hadn't have had breast cancer, I would have just gone on and just always been on tour and just never really found out that maybe I wasn't supposed to be married to that person or whatever the case.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of silver linings in it, and now I just feel like it made me into an adult. And before it, I wasn't an adult.
Yeah.
Regardless of the number of my age, I just don't feel like I was really a woman.
Yes.
Until that happened. So. I kind of like it now.
Yeah.
I like having that as my history.
Absolutely.
I always just say anyone who ever needs to talk about anything like cancer or spinal injury, head injury, anything that has, taken you away from what you're doing and you have trouble getting back into it, talk to me. We'll talk. talk about it.
And lastly, the other major theme of this year's CMW conference, in a lot of ways, and for obvious reasons in the news and in the culture, has been gender equality and diversity in the music industry. You're a bit of a pioneer. Excuse me. You're a bit of a pioneer in that regard. Like I said, you've been doing it completely independently since 1994. Probably one of the most recognizable female artists in Canada over the last, 25-ish years, whatever it's been. Having seen kind of that entire time frame within our industry, are things different now for better or worse than they were in the mid-90s? Do you see reason for hope and change and what needs to happen?
Well, I think that those changes have always needed to happen, obviously.
Yes.
But in any industry, whether you're in hospital administration or whether you work at a newspaper, there's always going to be a problem between genders. And that's just because of sex, really it is. And diversity and inclusion, add that to the mix. People have to like educate themselves and take sensitivity training. They just do in this day and age, no matter what your job is. But my experience in the music business is very different, possibly, from an elementary school teacher.
Yeah.
An elementary school teacher hopefully will not have to tour manage her own band and then go try and get paid from promoters who may or may not, tell you to flash your chest at them. I'm talking about the 90s. But I suspect that probably still happens to a lot of young bands, and it could happen to anybody, not just girls in bands. I don't know. Is it changing? I don't know. There's going to be bad apples in anything, but I think now it's easier to call them out on it.
And it seems like they're often at the root of it is a culture change, which can seem very nebulous. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But there's a consciousness that needs to go along with that. And like one of the panels yesterday during the Music Canada Forum, they had a panel on this, and one of the things that was often recalled there by female artists was like just not getting the respect. Like you go into a venue and the sound guy will go to the male member of the band to ask about your stuff.
That's right.
And that kind of just disrespect, consciously or unconsciously.
Of course, yes.
What can be done because that's a hard thing to change just by policy or that kind of thing. How does that change?
I don't know. That always that happens to me.
Yeah, still.
It happens all the time.
Does it still happen?
Of course it does. And often it doesn't happen. And the way I've always been, and a lot of the tougher girls, and I don't mean that in a bad way, in the music business, but my friends in L7, my friends in Belly, you know, even Jan, Arden, a lot of us girls, Joan Jett's another one, a lot of us girls who are veterans, you know, we've always kind of dealt with that. And I don't take it personally. And that's the thing. If there's a sound engineer who's going to talk to my bass player instead of me, hey man, I'm happy.
Yeah.
You know, I don't actually care. But that's me.
Yeah.
You know, I always just, I don't take it personally. You know, if somebody is a misogynist and they're going to say something to me like, you know, if I have an audience and we're singing a song and it's a heartfelt song and it's a rocker and I'm not, you know, out there in, you know, my G string, and even if I was, that's my prerogative, but, you know, I'm not trying to make it hypersexualized in any way, and they're going to yell something from the audience. You know, it's out of context, it's impolite, it's rude, but I'm going to just kind of like, I can't actually admit to assaulting anyone, but, you know, that was we're in the mosh pit. It's different. We dealt with it, and we kind of moved on, and the show went on. Nowadays, that's not how it is.
Yeah.
You know, now it's not tolerated. And it's not that we tolerated it either, but it was just different. And for me, just having a lifetime of always dealing with that when there were no other chicks on the bill, I don't know. I don't take it personally. I just think, you know, it's an intelligent quotient.
Yeah.
I'm just like, that person has a low IQ. I can't help them, but by being non-reactive, I'm helping myself, you know, have a good day. I don't know.
And lastly here, there's actually a story I just need to share with you. This is kind of selfish of me, but I feel like I'd kick myself if I didn't say it.
Good.
But you, many years ago, you taught my dad a good lesson in not judging a book by its cover, and it's one of his favorite stories.
Oh, very good.
And in the early 2000s, my dad was traveling for business, typical, you know, looking at a typical middle-aged white guy traveling for business, and ended up sitting on a plane next to you.
Oh, fun.
And I bet you probably have no recollection of this. But, you know, you stepped out and you're like looking at your punk rocker self and the assumptions that come with that. And like you sit down next to my dad, and then he notices you pull out I don't know what language it was, but you pulled out a book on how to teach yourself some random language, then pulled out a copy of like The Economist or The Atlantic or some literary current affairs magazine. My dad was watching this thinking like, oh, that's not what I expected.
That is
and
so
then
funny.
You guys got talking and he was blown away by your intelligence and your wits. And the kicker to it is you had asked him about what his sons do. And about me, he had said, I was in like high school at the time.
So funny.
And and about me, my dad had said, my youngest son wants to be John Lennon but can't sing or play an instrument. And you replied, I can't do either of those and I've made a damn good living at it.
Yeah.
And he still finds that an absolutely
That
hilarious
is so
line.
funny. I subscribed to The Economist.
There you go.
This is before the internet.
Yes.
Because for me, at that time in my life, I felt like that was the only place I could read unbiased news.
It's still a great magazine.
Yes, it is. And it was all about reading unbiased news. And I collect language books. I collect them. My father spoke Hindi, Urdu, Japanese, Spanish. So, you know, it was always fell on us to try. I'm terrible at most languages. Turkish is really easy if you want to learn a language because they went back to the English script. You can sound it out. Same with Polish. If you just remember C, Z is a J. You know, learning a language is fun.
And absolutely. So I just remember my dad coming home and be like, you know what artist named Bif Naked? Like, yeah, totally. And he's like, I met her and she like was super impressive.
That's so good.
Anyways, I just felt I had to share that because I've heard that
I
story
love
told
it.
so many
That
times.
made my day.
And but Bif, it's been a real pleasure getting to meet you, and I'm really glad you were able to make the time.
Thank you.
New song, Heavy, and Hotbox Girls are now out. Oh, I should add, when can we expect a full album?
I'm hoping that it'll be in the fall, by the fall. Early fall, not late fall. That's my wish.
Awesome. Canadian icon, Bif Naked. Thank you so